Huw, croeso, thank you for being here. Thanks for chatting with us. Really looking forward to learning a little bit more about Warsim and hopefully a little bit about Slumbox, your upcoming game as well. But just give us a little bit of a background on who you are, where you're from in Wales, and what sort of video games you started playing as a kid.
Yeah, man. So I'm Huw Millward. I'm from Cardiff. I was born on a carpet in a really rough part of Cardiff, and wouldn't change anything about it, man. I love Cardiff. I love it a lot. And yeah, so my background, I grew up playing everything I got my hands on, to be honest. I don't remember my earliest games. I played a lot of Flash games during like the golden age of that, which was beautiful. I think I caught the tail end. And yeah, like obviously all the big stuff, like Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls games, GTA, all the classics everyone loves. Like that was the stuff I was most in. Like, and yeah, at some point got into game programming or game design, I would say, on those like really, really crappy little discs you could get in like CEX or something. Or it wasn't even CEX then, like probably Cache Generator. And it was like a game making PC toolbox or something. And I remember playing with that when I was 11, and I was just retexturing games that already existed on the disc, but it was like, you made that, And I think that was when I was like, yeah, this is the shit. Like, this is the dream.
So what was there a game in particular or games in particular? You mentioned Skyrim there, and that is just everyone loves to mod Skyrim.
Dwarf Fortress, for some reason, it was just like, it was so accessible in a way, but then also so grand. Like they had both accessible and inaccessible in the same sort of look, in a way that like you can make a game that looks like Dwarf Fortress in 5 minutes, but Dwarf Fortress has the deepest like simulation mechanics of like world building of any game in history. You know what I mean? So it's like the dichotomy was crazy. And I remember looking at it at one point thinking, man, they've been working on that game for 15 years. I could never. Yeah. And now I'm like 11 years into Warsim. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's kind of crazy. Yeah. And big up Kit Fox Games who published Dwarf Fortress, because we're going to do a bundle with them hopefully in January. So nice. It's gone full circle for me with them.
Yeah.
But yeah. So those are the games that like most stick in my head as like they pushed me like specifically. I remember the thoughts.
Wow. Okay. So there's a bit of a link there, I think, between the types of games that you enjoyed there and what you've developed with Warsim, kind of medieval connection. Because I was going to ask why that specifically. So there must be a little bit of a fondness for the kind of medieval era kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I just picked it. I can't remember what I even landed it on. Like the Warsim thing was weird because its name comes from the fact it was like a basic war simulation tutorial at one point, right? And I followed like a YouTuber, and he made like some really basic war NPC v NPC type thingy, and I actually replaced that war simulator code way later. So it lost the thing it was originally built on, which was a demo learning how to code. And I went and worked on, ironically, a Fallout game also that ran in like ASCII art sort of shit. And I did that because Fallout 4 was coming out, but it was so far away yet. And I was like, oh, I really want to play Fallout 4. I'm going to make my own weird one in C++, right? Pure raw C++, no engine, no nothing. And I made it. I got a small community. People were sending me money and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, this is weird. Like, I'm a game dev now. Like, I've got a game project. People are supporting. People love it. People are reporting bugs, making mods. Like, and then I worked on it for 6 months, and I was in a hotel. I was writing code on napkins. Like, I was super intensely obsessed with it. And I was one day typing away, and it crashed. And I was like, oh, shit. And I reopened the IDE, and it was empty. And I couldn't figure it out. I was like, what happened? And I kept trying to, nope, it was gone. And I hadn't made any backups because stupid me, right? I'd never made a game before. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just so deep in the source.
Yeah.
And I lost this like Fallout type game, which is called The Waste, still on itch.io, still gets people posting about it now, which blows my mind. Because we're talking like probably 8 years ago, maybe more. And I was like, right, well, what the fuck do I do now? Do you know what I mean? And I picked up this old demo project of mine, which was a basic war simulator. And I was like, all right, I'll add an arena. I spent a week doing that. And okay, what else can I add? And it was just, and obviously I did that for years and years and years then. And at some point it turned into something a lot bigger than ever I thought it would be.
That was kind of Eminem levels of depth there, where you're writing on napkins. Like that's something he would do, with writing on little, anything he could find. I always remember that specifically. There's been a lot of feedback then throughout the development of the game. How has that shaped Warsim to being what it is today?
Yeah, it's a good question, mate. So I thought about it the other day, actually. And it's just that, like, so at its peak, Warsim was the 88th highest rated PC game of all time on Steam. And the only reason it got there was because of other people's feedback, for sure. Like, if I delivered the game that was in my head, and I'd been in my own little space and had never looked at the internet, it would have been a shitter game so significantly. Like, and not that I'm a bad game designer or anything like that, but just that like there are so many nuances that I maybe hadn't appreciated. And it's like, it's so hard to pull yourself away from being that close to it. You know what I mean? When you're the one every day building every element of it. And Proc Gen keeps it fresh. You know, you can't predict everything that comes out of it, but it was still quite difficult. And some players would mention stuff that like they had a different play style to me, right? So in my play testing, I still would never trigger these problems. And then they'd go, yeah, but when you play it this, oh my God, yeah, I didn't even think about that. And I'd fix it, right? And then I would start playing that way and go, oh, this is actually way cooler. And I learned ways to play my game watching other people do it, right? But like, you know, then I would enrich those areas because they'd mentioned it. Or a player would go, you know, you should add the ability to get drunk. And I was like, yeah, why not? We had a massive like drinking system, 40 bars, thousands of random events. Like you can wake up smashed in countless different encounters. There's so many weird things related to that now. And it's like, that was a random thing a player said. And like, there's so many things like that that just came from a person mentioning it. And then there's also that other thing, which is like at a really, really small micro indie level, you'll get like players who will say like, hey, the Welsh flag on your wall is crooked, man. You know, and like, cool, right? Is that a bug report? Yeah. And maybe you'll get one or two of them, but you have 1,000 players, you're going to get 10 people saying that. You get 10,000 players, you're going to get 100 people saying that. Like, there's no original thought. So what would happen is by listening to those people, you know, you'd eliminate a lot of other complaints because they're all talking about the same stuff. And people go, oh, they've even considered this thing that I wouldn't have even imagined they would have thought of, but it's because enough people brought it up, right? And I realized this is the key to game development. Like, it's the strongest way to develop is with your community in mind. And you see so many games where they're just like, they seem to be in vacuums away from each other. And you have a community that exists despite the development team because they love the game. And it's always passion, right? It's like, nah, these people care. They care about my game. They have love for something I created. Like, I'd be rude not to listen to them. Do you know what I mean? And don't get me wrong. Like, some people are like, hey, you should update everything, rename the whole thing and change it into a space game. I'm like, okay, you can fuck off. But like, but it's passion, isn't it? It's love and it's passion. And like those things absolutely shaped the game, made it tenfold better than it ever would have been if I hadn't listened to them. And it's been better for me to play. Do you know what I mean? So like, selfish ways as well, but like 100%, mate. Good question. Like, it's a really important thing.
I think it's the nature of the type of game as well. Obviously, it's not going to work for all games if you're just going to listen to all community feedback. But I think the type of game that Warsim is, a text-based adventure game where there's millions, trillions of different things that can happen in any one single playthrough. I think it has to start off as a personal passion project, which is what it started off as for you. It had to have. You were making something that you wanted to play by the sounds of it. But if you're going to, like you said, if you're only going to make it something that you want to play, it possibly would not become the thing that it potentially could be. So I just love that you've really embraced the community there. And I know that you try and respond to just about everybody. I just think it's such a great example of a developer that really cares about his community. And just a great example, really, of somebody that's just so dedicated to their own craft. And then, because you don't know where it's going to go, but, you know, it's gone where it has because of the absolute dedication for something that you wanted to create, essentially.
Oh, yeah, man. No, I appreciate that. I think that's why I'm a convert for this style of development, really, because I think, like, actually, it's the only guaranteed way in it. If you come into it with just pure passion and it just echoes it between you and the community. Like, you can go anywhere, really, can you? And I mean, like, you know, Warsim, it's the type of game I wanted to play to some degree, but like, I never wanted to play a text-based game of any kind, right? It's just all I could code, right? All I could code. I was learning like basic programming. I wrote it from scratch. Like I wrote the entire thing from nothing and no engine. So I had no idea what I was doing. So that was the best I could do with like educational level skill. Yeah. And like, I guess Slumbox, then this next one, it's more like what I can do with a team and with actual, like, okay, this was something I would want to play, right? With the exception of it being 3D, which I suppose, like, 3D games, to be fair, I do like those probably the most, but I ain't AAA right now. Do you know what I mean? So we're not at that level. We're like in the mid stage of the Pokemon evolution type thing.
Yeah. All right. I know there's a load of procedural generation within Warsim, and for someone that, like me, I haven't got a clue about game dev. I really don't. Like, I wouldn't know where to start. But, you know, in its basic terms, could you explain how that works? I can sort of get you know, sort of random name generators, and I can understand how that, you know, can create different hundreds, thousands, millions of different names, and how you've got it working for races within the game. But when I look at something like the amazing ASCII graphic emojis, How does that work? How does it know how to create a face and things?
Do you know what, right? The face ones are actually quite simple. So
Yeah.
I remember I came up with a system for those face generators when I saw one of those books. It was like a children's book. And it's one of those ones where you've got like, it's split into three. You've got eyes, nose, and mouth. And
Yeah.
kids would like flip through them and you could make all these funny faces. And I saw that and I was like, I could do that, right? Because I can't track like stuff more than like, individual lines, right? But what we could do is say have hair, eyebrows, eyes, nose, mouth, right? And then if I make sure that every piece of it, every part that is made that is a forehead part is always following the same criteria, that it has to be this size, right? Then any one of them will fit with any other one of them. And so what I did that, and it started off with like, if you think about how like it's called combinatrix, right? The multiplication of things. So like, okay, if you've got 10 foreheads, 10 eyebrows, 10 eyes, 10 noses, 10 upper lips, 10 lower lips, and 10 chins, you have 10 million different variants.
Whoa.
Because that's how many combinations can be made of that much data. So what I would do is do that and be like, okay, cool. And there's a crown you can put on the head as well, right? And there's 100 different crowns. So times it by 10 again, right? Or times it by 100.
Yeah.
And what I learned was like, and this was kind of cheesy for the early Warsim updates, but like I could add one new eye part and it would make like 7 million new, right? So I could really do like quite low level changes and make quite a dramatic, like actual change in theory to how many, but at some point, you're never going to see the same again. And I think I did that and then ended up making about 40 different face generators for the different races using the same system. And I've noticed that some were like, they only had like 50,000 different goblin faces. So I'd spend a week just adding so many different weird parts of all these different things and turning it into hundreds of each. And now we've got trillions, right? Trillions of everything. But it's just combinatrix, mate. It's just basically different things that are sort of all designed to follow the same vague rules that they wouldn't look weird if they fit on top of each other. And it works. Yeah, it's crazy. Like it's such a weird, simple in a way, but also like can turn itself into being quite complicated. I would say that the race system is probably the most advanced that we've got.
Yeah. Are there any examples that you can think of that you like the names or races that wacky, weird races that you can think of that you really think are cool or stupid or anything like?
I don't remember like any specific examples. There's one that really stuck in my mind before, which was I was play testing my game, right? And obviously orcs, elves, you got all sorts of different races. And I went into the game and I was like, just in like autopilot, just like testing something. So I'm not perceiving anything on the screen really. I'm just hyper clicking through all the menus to like see if this thing I just added worked. And suddenly I just see this big blue ugly face. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And it was a blue orc. And I was like, what the hell is this, a bug? And I looked at the race and he was from the Blue Orcs. And I was like, of course, it's a Blue Orc for the Blue Orcs Kingdom. But it just pulled me out a little minute. And obviously that's probably one of the less exciting races. Another really good one, which wasn't one that I had, I think it was Death Eater Thunder Zombies. So like there's hundreds and hundreds of traits and there's like a whole wiki for it, but these traits can all combine with each other. And a lot of them have like really unique effects. So chaotic, like if a race is chaotic, like you've got chaotic half elves or something, every year their relations with every faction will be randomized. So one year they could be your best friend. The next year they will kill everyone. They will be attacking you, whatever. And in the end, they piss off everybody because no one else is randomized in relations. They're remembering every time the Chaos Orcs turned on them. And eventually they just get closed off by everyone, right? But you have so many different things like that. And one of them is Death Eater. And so Death Eaters, essentially every 100 kills that the Death Eaters commit as a race, they gain a +1 to their strength. They have like 100 by default, right? Something like that, let's say. So like it's a pretty minuscule thing. But if you're in like late stage, the kingdoms are massive, right? And let's say there's a kingdom of 1 million people or 1 million Death Eaters, right? And they're fighting another kingdom of 1 million. Those deaths stack up and the strength balloons. And suddenly they're becoming like monstrously problematic. And there was a player, a fan of the game, who basically he was capturing all these kingdoms and he became really big, but he had a kingdom of these Death Eaters. And he was like, oh, this is a weird thing. But what he was able to do was beat them, chop them down a little bit, but he kept them alive. He then made them his vassal and he took their people as his like champions and heroes and stuff. And then he trained them to the point where they became like abominably powerful, basically. And he would send one of them and they would wipe out any kingdom. And like no one else seems like I've never seen anyone get even close. This guy made like their default strength would be say 100. He had them strength at like 2 billion or something. It was like it was insane. Like I've never seen it myself. This guy completely fucked the game up. And he's going, hey, some things are broken. I'm like, yeah, no fucking shit. Things are broken. You've got like super soldiers that are bending reality. But yeah, so like that's quite fun. And I quite like the unbalanced nature of it. So like there are some games where everything has to be fair, but like for Warsim, like I made it kind of my pride that like, good luck. You know what I mean? Like you might roll and it's a quite friendly world. The Goblin Slave is giving you good rates. Like the prices are cheap. The economy's good. There's loads of money in your bank and the things in your area are chill. The 5 kingdoms you've got are friendly. They want to make alliances with you. Cool. And you could have another one where on turn number 1, the nearby town burns down. The Goblin Slaver is selling goblins for 1,000 gold instead of 10, you know, like all the stuff is expensive. Every kingdom wants to kill you, you know, and it's like, that's awesome, man. You know what I mean? Like, good luck, you know?
Yeah.
And I kind of love it. But yeah, so those races are always random, always weird, always kind of unpredictable.
I'm just picturing now just one single orc or something going into this kingdom and just being like, just killing them, wiping everybody out. It's crazy. But I think that's the other appeal to the game is the fact that I think that's why visual novels are so popular as well. Obviously, this is got a complete lack of visuals except for the ASCII images. But you can imagine what's going on in your head. So, you know, I've got one interpretation of, you know, that orc charging in and wiping out that kingdom. You've got another version of how that looks, you know. It's just, and to that player it's happening for, he's got his own version. I think that's just part of the huge appeal of it, is that it's like a book, essentially, a create your own adventure book with a lot of random elements.
It really is, yeah. Wow, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
It's like a choose your own adventure game on crack, isn't it? Like
exactly. One thing I wanted to briefly just touch on is, you know, obviously part of what I like to do is scour games for any kind of Welsh reference. And I know you've got some, as a Welshman, you've obviously wanted to put a little bit of Welshness in the game there. Hell yeah.
Dragon, let's go.
Nice. So you've got a bunch of Welsh names for characters that can be randomly generated. And I know you referenced the Red Dragon. Of course, the Welsh word for king, Brenin, is in there. Is there anything else I'm missing, or any little nuggets?
Oh, do you know what? I think I would struggle to remember myself, man.
Yeah,
I feel like there's 10 years of adding loads of shit to this game.
Yeah.
Like, there was so many things like that. But I think you covered a lot of them. Yeah, we've got the Demon King, who like is the big bad guy in the game. His like historical references, he's from some place where red dragons blow in the wind, and it was kind of a play on the fact that it's in my head, and I'm in Wales, so he's in Wales. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's quite a few like that.
I wonder if you could do, what if you did like a little Welsh patch, like a little Welsh update with a bunch of Welsh words or things that you could throw in there.
Do you know what I had a plan years ago for an update where I wanted to add an island that was called like Cymru, but like spelt a little bit weirdly.
Yeah.
And there were plans to add like almost like a post-apocalyptic but medieval Wales in there. But it's in the pile of mad ideas that are festering still for Warsim somewhere.
That would be cool. That would be cool. All right. So I mean, I've got a bias to like the Nintendo Switch. I don't know if have you ever thought about porting the game to consoles, or is that just too unfeasible?
So I tried actually to get a mobile port specifically. We did get one running. And we've got Warsim running on Steam Deck, but generally speaking, because it runs out of Windows command prompt, which is wild anyway, most consoles don't really allow that. So it's just not really viable. Obviously, there could be like a wrapper put around it or something like that, but I think it's just such a weirdly made game that I'm in this niche where it's like it's PC only and it's English only, and it's just sort of is what it is. But I will not be making that mistake with future games, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah.
More out of necessity, really, in this case.
What stage then? Because I know you're sort of you're doing a hell of a lot of traveling as well, going to conferences, and you've probably told the Warsim story a million times now. So there's probably 1,000,001 right now. But at what stage did things sort of really get to a point where you were now getting on flights going to GDC and traveling to, you know, you said you were in Finland this past couple of weeks with some other Welsh game devs. Like, how did it get to that stage? Like, who approached you, and how did that happen?
It's really weird, man. Actually, like this year, to be honest.
Yeah.
So like for the whole of my game dev career, like I don't think anyone in Wales knew I was in Wales, and I didn't really know there was anything else going on. I was just in my own bubble. I think I did some research, and I think that's why your resources, you know, your website, those sorts of things are actually quite helpful, because I remember at the time I was like, are there any other game devs in Wales? And I had a look, and I was like, oh, I guess there's some stuff floating around, but they were all just mysteries to me. And like I proper had a little look. I can't remember exactly the moment, but it was at some point this year, I decided to sort of put myself out there a bit more, or maybe late last year, and made more of a connection with Creative Wales, actually, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Amazing organization, and their job essentially is to try and create a stronger games industry presence here in Wales. Because of course, like, you know, there's no reason why we couldn't have a massive industry here. It's digital, right? There's no inherent resource other than our own minds and creativity that are required. And so what they've been doing is trying to foster anything that already exists and create new studios and things like that. And I'd already been doing my thing. They just didn't know I existed. So I was like, hey, and we ended up chatting, and they were really helpful. And Bosch took us out to America, didn't they? And a few other things. We just come back from Helsinki now. It's really beneficial. And I think the strongest thing of all, weirdly, has not been anything that's happened in those places or anyone we've spoken to, but it's weirdly been the other Welsh studios we've met on the trip, right? Because we're tied together as a group. And so you end up chatting to them and sharing tips and sharing, thoughts and ideas and working together. And, I've now worked together with several of the people from these trips that I've met. And some of them are like probably some of my best mates. And we have quite a lot in common, shockingly, because we're all game devs, right? So yeah, it's been really interesting. But yeah, I would say I was under the radar, man, for a long time. Just doing it in my own little vacuum, literally sat in my bedroom, not really doing anything. And it's gone nuclear the last year or two, especially with the founding of Worldviper, which is like a completely separate thing to Warsim that was made with in mind moving on and trying to enter the games industry in a really serious way, not just in a sort of niche indie context, but to try and, as I'm describing it, punch the game industry in the face with this new game and, see what goes from there in it, really.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to get a few black eyes in time. But what have been the benefits then of you being able to do this, traveling around? What goes on when you go to these conferences? Are you kind of giving your story essentially to people, and so that they can learn from that?
I mean, it obviously varies depending on where we go, but I guess the standard thing is what we're doing is with the Welsh government, it's a trade mission. So they take businesses from Wales in this specific niche, in this case, video games, and they take us to conventions that they deem as a potential benefit to us. And they do everything in their power to get us in a position that's going to be good. So they'll arrange events, they'll arrange meetings with people, they'll sort out sort of mixes and things like that. And if there are any events going on anyway with the UK government or anyone they have a connection with through the embassy, they'll make that. So, for example, I was in the British embassy in Helsinki, and in there were dozens of other business people, dozens of investors. I think we had one of the London Stock Exchange people. It was full, of all these different people. We're obviously having a couple of glasses of wine and chat to the next person in it. Who are you? What are you up to? And it's really, really beneficial. Then they'd have like a breakfast where we're all there in our suits talking to investors, and they're coming around looking at our pitches, right? And they sort of book that in. And when we went to GDC, we went for a really nice talk in Silicon Valley Bank, and I got to meet the CEO of that and had a nice conversation about how I thought crypto was a bubble and stuff like that, But like lovely conversations with these people, really insightful. And then obviously GDC itself is just a whole bubble of crazy, and you can't breathe without bumping into someone from the games industry there. It's kind of crazy. So like we'd go to a hotel lobby somewhere that was nowhere near the event, and one of the chiefs of Krafton is there chatting to us in, what I mean? And we're talking about the next thing they're working on. Or like, we'd be in a hallway somewhere and it's like, oh, these dudes just wrapped up working on Hogwarts Legacy or something, And it's like, oh, cool. That's awesome. Hi, and the connections you make there are kind of invaluable. Completely opposite word. But like, there's so many really cool things that you get from those events, and they just give us a really nice platform. Like they take us out there, they subsidize it quite heavily in support of us and get us in the rooms with the right people. And the people they're able to connect us with are insane. So any budding Welsh game devs who are building their way up, like I would say, get on the side of Creative Wales and show that you're worth having on those trips if you want to join us. But it's excellent. It's excellent. Yeah. And you see how tight knit actually the industry is, and how the players in it are all really caring of each other, And I think we all got the same goal in mind, which is to see Wales thrive. It's the same goal you've got in it. We want to see our beautiful country do well, and we want to see an industry manifest itself in there and show that, like, in shockingly the biggest field of entertainment, which isn't movies, it isn't music, it's games, like show that we can punch above our weight creatively, just like we do in, a lot of other things, spiritually and sort of emotionally.
Yeah, well put. Definitely. Wales is a prime location for movies. We developed so many TV shows and things here. There's no reason why games can't be that next big thing for Wales as a worldwide force, essentially. And, you being a part of that is just amazing, really. Have you sort of bumped into people that, at any conferences that know who you are and they're like, oh, I played Warsim, or, have you bumped into anyone like that?
I think I've had like a few random ones. I think the craziest one was probably going to GDC. Actually, I was sat on a plane, and I had a couple of the boys from North Wales were sat on a row next to me. I didn't know who they were yet, but we would know them in time, right? And so the three fellas all lined up. It was crazy, actually. So the first fella, I'd never met him before. His name's Gaz Thomas. So he's actually the sector lead for North Wales's games industry, and he runs a company called Rarebit. And so he's made Flash games that have had over 1 billion plays. Like, this guy's a genius. So he was really cool to know. I was actually one of my best mates now. And sat next to him was this other guy called Chaz who worked with him. So Chaz has made some other really, really cool web games back in the day. And he asked me, like, what do you work on, mate? And I told him. And he was like, wait, what's it called? And when I showed him, he was like, you're not going to fucking believe this. But 2 days prior to that trip, he'd been reading Retro Gamer. And I got an advert in Retro Gamer. And I paid like $1,000 for it or whatever. And I thought, fuck it, I'll make my ad look as bootleg as possible because everything else is so clean. If mine looks terrible and it's all MS Paint ass shit, like, it'll stick out in people's minds. He'd seen it and gone, what the fuck is this? And bought it. And he was like, that's you. Like, no way. So I was on the plane to GDC. So I was like, oh, mate, imagine that. And then the guy sat next to him is from a company called Bird and Sky. And he made a game called Death War 3030, which I played. And I just thought it was some American guy. And it was him. He'd made it in North Wales. And I was like, man, like, this trip is jokes, like, already. And we barely even got off the tarmac, like, and that was happening. So I knew that GDC was going to be amazing, which it was.
Wow.
But yeah, it's wild.
Cool. Well, that advert sounds like it paid off anyway. So.
Oh, absolutely.
So you've set up a new studio then, Worldviper Studios. What are some of those biggest lessons that you've learned from developing Warsim that you've been able to take into, well, creating a new studio for yourself and hiring people? So that's got to be a first as well, because you were working solely on your own previously. What are some of the biggest things that you've learned then? Yeah,
I mean, you're absolutely right. You're on the money there. There's a big difference between solo and with a team. And it's actually like quite drastic, shockingly. So I think for me, like, obviously I've got ADHD, right? I can lock in. And if I want to be up until 4 a.m. working on a new Warsim feature, I could do that. And I could, if I've got something I needed to be out by the end of this week, I could get it out by the end of the day if I really threw my fucking soul into it. But when you've got a team, like, it's not so simple. You've got to manage that now, and everyone's working on their corners. And unlike Warsim, there's art involved. There's physics involved. There's obviously, it's a lot deeper, and things require a bit more time to do certain things. So I think it's coming to terms with the difference in pace and the difference in sort of quality of what's being produced means that the development is different. But like, things I've learned from Warsim that have transferred over is definitely that, I want to be more mindful about my decisions, which I thought I was being back then, but I don't think I was. Like, where early on, things that I laid out as like, this will be how it is, I was then having to go back and overhaul that years later in a big way. And I think now I'm like, no, I can see how this will pay off in the future. So I need to line this up quite cleverly, really. And I think then probably the biggest things I've learned also are language, modability, and portability, right? So I want to make sure that it's not just going to be PC only anymore, because obviously we've got to survive, right? And if you have your game on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, your PC sales can be terrible, but your Xbox sales could still be good, And I've learned this from other studios who do this. Like, you do often find that, there's always going to be something that's going to do well, even if the others aren't doing so good. So you sort of have that multiple eggs, multiple baskets thing, which I think would be invaluable, especially when you obviously got wages and a studio to run. And then the other one is languages. So this might be quite basic for some people and might quite obvious, really, but with Warsim, it was only in English. And that was because I only speak English, really, like little fragmented bits of Polish, Italian, Welsh, and that sort of thing. But like, I made it for me. I never made it for anyone else. And by the time it was big enough, it wasn't really feasible to be translated, because the words weren't like in some document somewhere that could be swapped out. They were in the code itself. And that was a huge mistake, really, in hindsight. But of course, hindsight's 2020. And if you can't tell, I ain't got 2020 vision to begin with. But like, I didn't know, you know what I mean? And years later, it just wasn't feasible to sort of modify it in a way that it could even be done. Whereas now, we're very much doing that with that in mind, because Warsim's sold in over 110 countries. And I find that insane. We've sold one in Antarctica. I don't know how.
What?
You know what I mean? Like some bored guy in a research station playing with ASCII gnomes.
That is incredible.
But like, how well would it do if, it was in Brazilian Portuguese, right? How much better would it be selling in Portugal or in Brazil, right? How much better would it be selling in Germany if there was a German version? And I think there are a lot of countries that Steam allows us access to in such a beautiful way now, where, I mean, I think 60% of my sales are in the US, but like, would that be only because it's in English, right? What if I had the game in Spanish? Where would the sales be then, you know? And like, I think it's silly to close doors on yourself that don't need to be there. And obviously translating costs money, but where there's a will, there's a way. And I genuinely believe that that's the biggest lesson I've learned, is to make sure that this next game has the fighting chance to be on every platform and in every language that I can possibly get it on without sacrificing the quality of the game. So for example, like I won't do a mobile port if it means the game has to be worse for everyone else, because, you know, what's the point? You know, I want to deliver something good first, and then, you know, if I can port it second. But yeah, I'd say those are the biggest lessons, really. It's more just like the structuring of things and sort of how it's being sold to everyone. But other than that, I think listening to the community, like as you said, it's not necessarily as viable depending on the kind of game, especially when you're playing like multiplayer games where some people want things easy, some people want things hard. And like when I went into it, I thought with Warsim, I thought 99% of the ideas people had would be shit. And there'd be a few people that would have good ideas, but mostly just be people going, I want it to be a My Little Pony game. Do you know what I mean? Shut up. Like, no, but it wasn't. It really wasn't. Like, it was actually like almost everybody's ideas were actually quite valid. And some of them were a bit weird, but still pretty funny and would have fit. And some of them were really like, oh, no, this is really good immersion. Or, oh, that's really, you know, they had different reasons, but they all actually were quite thematically relevant. And I think like it's probably going to be similar for Slumbox. You know, it's probably going to be similar for this next game. And I want to try and, you know, of course, when you've got a team, right, you don't want to lead them astray following everyone else's like, oh, well, 69-120 wants me to do this, and dragonfox.com over here wants me to do this thing, you know, so let's do this, and we'll be chasing our own tails. But I still think like listening to the community once we're in a profitable position and obviously hopefully selling lots of games, I think, yeah, why not make it better by listening to the community and being as plugged in to that pulse as possible, because it's only going to grow then to be something even greater. And that's, I guess, the plan I've got for Slumbox really, is to try and achieve the ability to have a team that can work on this for longer than the development cycle might traditionally be, which is quite scary for investors actually. But I think it's kind of logical really that, you know, what a 2-year pump and dump game doesn't do as well as a game that's been crafted for years, because you're actually trying to make it sticks out to the players, right? It's there's more gameplay, there's more to do. But I guess that's my job to prove again.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
I think obviously a brand new project here. I suppose you're developing a game that, like Warsim, is something that you want to play. I know you mentioned you don't, you know, a text-based adventure game wasn't what you wanted to play, but when you were developing it, it was still something that, a game that you would like, essentially. So I imagine the same goal is the same for your new game, Slumbox, and then branching out into listening to feedback from the community.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think Slumbox is going to be what I wanted to play even more so, to be honest. Like, because I'm a big RPG fan, and I think that's kind of what happened with Warsim. I think you make a good point there. Is like, it may not have been the style of game I wanted to play, but I filled it with stuff I like and made it the game I would like to play anyway. And I think like a lot of that was shoehorning in things that were vaguely RPG features, because I love RPGs. And it's like, now I'm making an RPG, so it's like this is the dinner table I wanted to be eating at, really. Do you know what I mean? And I think like I'm going to be even more indulging in that and making a game I like. And I actually had this conversation with an investor recently who was saying like, well, you shouldn't make games that you like because your tastes are probably going to be niche and weird. And you should really be making games you think other people will like. And I was like, hard disagree with you, mate, because my taste isn't that special. Like, I love things like GTA, Fallout, Skyrim. Do you know what I mean? Like The Witcher, like some of the biggest RPGs in the world, like Stardew Valley, you know, like all of these games are things that basically everyone fucking likes, and they like them for a reason, because they're good games. They contain with them pretty good systems, and I kind of want to do the same. You know, I want to take a lot of the lessons from some of those games, but also put my own spin on it and do a lot of things that no one has done before, and make something I want to play. And I think like a lot of those games, there were times where I was like, damn, this is really good, but it would be really cool if you could also just do this as well, you know, and like it didn't have those, right? And that's one of the things that you know makes me want to be a game dev, you know, and as being so good with Warsim that I'd be like, man, if only we could do this. Oh wait, and then the next day it was in there because I'm the guy, right? And I think like I want to have that power with Slumbox to make a really, really good RPG game, and at the same time have the ability to then, you know, indulge in actually making those quality features and making it like even better. And yeah, I guess proving people wrong or whatever in it at the same time, but it's not the main goal.
But one of them.
Why not? Yeah, exactly.
Stardew is a great example that you mentioned there. The developer was a fan of Harvest Moon games, but wanted it to be something more. So he decided to make it. You know, he decided to make a farming sim game with RPG elements that he wanted to see. And look where it is now. And
40 million copies sold. Insane.
There you go. And it's still being developed. He's still pushing out free updates, just like you are with Warsim. I don't know when you're gonna stop with that. Is there going to be an end point, you think, at some time?
I don't know, mate. I mean, I just bought a new computer, and I'm trying to port the coding stuff over, and it's not ported very well. So I literally have to use this old broken laptop at the moment if I want to work on any more Warsim stuff. And I hope that isn't where the ending is. But you know, if we have no problems actually continuing development on a new computer, I think realistically, I'm probably going to be doing at least piecemeal or random updates every now and again forever. Like, I don't know if it'll ever stop. Because I said 5 years ago, probably for another year, who knows? And it's still here. I've been working on Slumbox now for nearly 2 years, and there's been like 20 Warsim updates, you know? So like, I think the intensity is definitely slowed down. Because there was a point when we had an update every like 2 days, which I don't know how I did that. Now, someone was telling me, do you have ADHD? Because it may be that you were really obsessed with it. And I was like, yeah, okay, that was it. But yeah, like it's still, you know, I still got time for it. It still gets little updates here and there. There's still 2,500 features on a to-do list, which is insane to me. And I chopped so many off of that list as well. So, you know, it's never fully dead. It's always a little bit of a love for me. And I mean, I've got it tattooed on my arm, a little Warsim character, you know, like it ain't going anywhere.
Is there anything, any updates maybe in the back of your mind that you might want to, that you haven't shared, that you want to try and implement, or you're trying to keep it close to your chest?
Difficult, mate. So there's one thing I have learned is it's much better to just appear out of nowhere with the goods than it is to promise the goods and then actually not be able to deliver them. And so historically, I've always been a fan of just the boom, here we go.
Yeah.
Didn't expect this, did you? Boom, necromancy. Boom, randomly generated lands, like whatever, all sorts of stuff like that. But there have been a lot of updates over the years that I've been like toying with and then ended up like temporarily shelving. So I had one a while ago, which it must have been a few years back now. We added this thing called the Lands Beyond. And so for ages, people have been sort of kicking off about how in Warsim, there's a lot of prop gen. But when it comes to the lands you explore in your immediate sort of realm, they're all mostly, with some exceptions, they're all hard-coded. So there are some things that vary within those quite significantly, actually, but there are also some that are going to be the same every time you play. And so people are like, kind of defeats the replayability a bit. And I was like, I see what you're saying, definitely. And it's not viable that I fix those things either. So we added an alternate thing, which alongside your traditional exploration, you can spend your chances to explore there instead. And it's called the Lands Beyond. And so in the Lands Beyond, I think there are maybe like 5,000 different random location types that can come out of it. And so you just explore, you go far beyond where your world is or whatever, where your immediate sort of territory is. And you can find all sorts of crazy stuff. And it took me so long. I actually spent, I think, a month just coding encampments, because I was like, I'll just add a couple of variants. And then I realized like 150 variants of 100 variants ends up being so many actual individual things that need to be accounted for. It drove me up the wall. But we got there in the end. And on the back of that, a little while later, people were talking about it. I did start thinking like, okay, maybe we could do something similar, but call it the Seas Beyond, right? Instead of the Lands Beyond. And this one would be, you take a boat, you choose a group of people to send, maybe a captain. But the boat could be randomly generated even. We could have different parts that do different things. You could have a fleet, a port, maybe like people would visit and you could steal their ships or talk to them or trade. And then you send your ships on these like voyages and stuff, and they could find randomly generated islands. And it could be, I came up with like thousands and thousands of different possibilities there. And then I looked at it and went, this is going to take me fucking 2 years. And I was like, okay, maybe later. And later didn't come.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of stuff like that. I think that's probably the biggest one lately that's been floating. And I'm currently looking at a monster update that I need to have a little toy with, because we've got some really deep monster systems at the moment. But I feel like it could probably just flesh a little bit more out and be even fatter, like
even fatter orcs.
Exactly, mate. The orcs, they're on grass-fed beef now. Like,
no steroids yet.
No, not just yet. We got nukes though.
You got nukes?
Yeah, I had an update. It must have been last year now, maybe a little bit earlier than that. So you've I had a problem, right? This power player, like the guy that broke the game with his superpowered mega lightning ogres, whatever the fuck they were, he also reached the maximum cap of gold. And I added an event to stop this, which was kind of cheesy, which was just if you hit like 2-point-something billion, there's an event and it's like the floor crashes, loads of money, whatever, and you Mansa Musa the situation. Essentially, you've got so much money that you devalue what money actually is, and it just divides what you have by 10 because you've just nuked the economy. Wow. And then people were like, that was kind of cheap. You know, you kind of robbed us there with that. And I was like, you know what? It is actually quite a cheap little solution. So what I did instead was once you get over 1 billion, you get a new option, which is to create something called a teraton. And a teraton is this gigantic cube of gold that's worth $1 billion. And then it sets your gold to minus $1 billion because you've got 1 teraton plus whatever money you've got left, which means you can have up to 2 billion teratons, which would be, no one's ever done that, right? So, but then I was like, okay, what do you do with them though, right? Like, that's cool. We've quantified a way to save you from hitting an economic cap, but now there has to be a use for them. So I added these very, very like high level upgrades for like the arena. Like you could build these towers that would do like crazy things, like figure out the answer to life, which it actually can, or like increase your troops' strength like insanely and stuff like that. And one of them is this thing called the Teraton Catapult, and it costs a Teraton to build. And once you've built it, you can blast a Teraton yourself, and essentially you are throwing it on another kingdom. And if it lands on them, it is a nuclear bomb, and it wipes them all out. And yeah, it's weird. Like people were posting, like, we got nukes in Warsim before GTA 6. Like,
yeah,
it's a very, very weird update.
Oh, I love that.
Very
That's
awesome.
Brilliant. All right then, Slumbox. So this is your next project and the first one under your new company, Worldviper Studios. Give us a sort of brief lowdown of what the game is. I know it's a sort of RPG, set in a dystopia world where you kind of have to make your own, stand your own 2 feet, and survive in this kind of crazy little world. But in your words, how would you explain Slumbox?
Yeah, I mean, you've pretty much nailed it on the head again there, mate. But essentially, there's a big crusty city that's been fully generated for you to live in. That's very wealth divided. There's hundreds of districts. You've got gangs competing and fighting. You're thrown at the deep end. You're like 18 years old. Get a job, right? That's Slumbox. So you're thrown in. If you want to work at Slimeburger, pumping burgers, making money, you got to pay your taxes. You go back to your house and you're playing on Kickfighter on your games console in your house. Like, you can do that. But essentially, what I've tried to build is something that's a bit of a mix of a love letter to life simulation games and RPGs at the same time. And I feel like life sims can look a bit boring, a bit naff like to people. But actually, I feel like people life sim in games like Skyrim and Fallout, right? You have a house, you can chop wood in Skyrim, right? And make your money as a trader and stuff like that. But the game doesn't really want that, so it's like, realistically, you're not going to be able to properly live doing that. But you kind of can just ignore the main quest and try your best. And I think like what I wanted to do with Slumbox was like actually allow for some serious gameplay to take place in those directions while still having it be a big RPG, where there's a lot of ways that you can build XP, a lot of directions you can go. And then taking a lot of lessons from games like Mount & Blade, where in Mount & Blade, a lot of people don't know if they don't play it. Like, it's not as popular as it should be, really. But Mount & Blade is an RTS played by AI while you play a RPG. And then eventually you can start taking part in the RTS in a more serious way. But at all times, you've got kingdoms that are competing and fighting for resources and territory. And you're just some guy running around the map while that's happening. And you can join one of them or fight them all or become a trader. And, oh, no, one of them just wiped out another kingdom and it's caused the economic... Like, things are cheaper now elsewhere, or you can't make as much money trading because one of the kingdoms just fucked the other one over and killed all the caravans and stuff. And it's really deep because the gameplay is created not by someone pre-coding it, by a smart system that has quite a lot of reactive stuff that then echoes onto the player. And they went really far and they're not far enough, in my opinion. It's one of the things that pushed me to be a game dev, because I was like, they're really cooking with something here. Yeah. So what I wanted to do with Slumbox is to make a game that contains within it a lot of consequential moving parts that also spit out things that control the way the player has to react to it. But the player wouldn't really be part of it. So you're not the big superhero that changes the world. You're some random schmuck in a shitty little poor district in a really fucked up capitalist dystopia. Get a fucking job. Like, good luck. You've got a capsule hotel style house. Your best friend is your neighbor Splarry. Do you know what I mean? Like, you work down the Slimeburger together. You want to go get drunk? Why not? Like, oh shit, one of the gangs is robbing you at knife point. What are you going to do? Better give them your credits, man. You know what I mean? Like, so I want to try and build something where you're not special, but the story you build in it, kind of like how Kenshi allows you to sort of build a story yourself. Like, it's quite an inspirational game as well, I'm trying not to build a proper Kenshi, because that would be insane. But sort of doing that style of the game in my own way, really. And like, I couldn't be happier to be here. I think it's still a war to try and build this, and obviously now I've got a team. It's sourcing the funding and figuring out how we do that as well. And I think that's the new battle. But luckily, I've got Warsim, which is like my golden goose at the moment. Just keep shitting golden eggs. Yeah. So everyone who's getting those eggs, thanks, man. But yeah.
So it sounds a little similar to Warsim in the sense that you really want to create a depthy game here with a lot of repercussion events that can happen and spread throughout the world,
Absolutely.
and possibly a lot of customization going on as well,
Definitely.
to sort of make it feel like an RPG. In terms of like the scope of the world, is there any sort of games you can liken it to, or do you really think this is going to be a one of a kind of game?
I mean, I hope it'll be a one of a kind game. Like, I'm trying to stick in a lot of stuff that no one has done before, and I think there's a lot. I mean, we've already got 2 world records right now that I'm pretty sure like are in the bag that no game has done, or that other games have done, but we've just beaten them all on it. But I would say, yeah, for size, I'm looking at some point to have it be so that when you start a new game, it's custom and you get to decide the size of the city that will take place. And so the only rule is that you have a city, and outside of it, you have an infinite wasteland. And the wasteland will, you'll spawn psychos, crazy people, broken robots, wild dogs, people traveling and roaming through to sell stuff, like crazy, who knows what. And it'll be a bit more like a crazy permadeath scavenger experience outside. And then you go into the city and, you can live your life and do whatever. So you play it how you want. But the city size can vary. So recently we've actually shrunk the city down to being something like 5 districts, which is so small, like a district being, a cube where within it you've got like a couple of buildings one side, a couple of buildings another, and a road going through it. Yeah. Not massive, really. But the original first demo we built had a city of like maybe 500 districts, and it was massive. And it would take like a good while to pass through with no restrictions, just to walk straight. We'd be taking like probably an hour to fully get around. And it is customizable, so I think we could do it in any direction. And we haven't yet started coding in the barriers, but the way it works is we have like a full map generated. It kind of looked a bit like an early Morrowind map to me for some reason. Just reminds me of their fast travel, where it's quite like a little bit squared, but like it moves off in all sorts of weird twisty shapes. And it was like how the city was as well. And what we do is originally the map generates, and then it splits the districts by wealth class. So generally speaking, the closer to the center, the richer they are, and the closer to the outskirts, the more likely they are to be abandoned. And you've got abandoned, low class, mid class, high class, and extravagant. And I think those are the main sort of separators. And the game's only rule when it generates those maps then is that the only time there's a wall is if you've got a district of a different class touching each other. So a low class district and a low class district, you can just walk straight through. But then you hit a mid class district and there's a gate. And that's sort of the intention there is to lean on a sort of hybrid between a sort of papers, please type system and but you're the NPC sort of visiting it. And then if you remember Fallout New Vegas's strip entry, you have to have 1,000 caps to get onto the strip. And it was such a cool idea, but it was like, by the time you're hitting the New Vegas strip, you've already got like 100,000 caps. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's such a basic low barrier that it was basically non-existent. It was just for fun. And like, I kind of want to make that, but worse, So like, actually, like, cool. You'll never get into a mid-class district unless you got 100 grand. Like, you want to get into a high-class district, you don't have 500,000. You want to get into a upper-class district, you want to go and join the extravagant class. Like, do you have 1 million? And you might be able to get some chipped discs to like try and roll a chance of succeeding to sneak past the guards with it and pretending you've got that money, depending on the quality of the hack. But realistically, you're going to be working your way up through these little crusty districts in the sort of lower tier areas, unless you choose or have unlocked a start where you can start in a different place. And like I really want to lean into those sorts of things, and make it actually quite hard to navigate the city unless you're, more wealthy and more put together. You'll sort of have to figure out your way to get around unless you're just in these little crusty districts, and there'll be little enclaves. And maybe that's where you live. You live in a low class district that's trapped, surrounded by upper class ones, and it's like, well, good luck, mate. You're gonna have to be sneaking out of there somehow to go and work your job and then come back home.
Is there like a degree of violence? Is there like any kind of combat system, or is this very much relying on RPG mechanics more than anything else?
So I think the intention is to try and make a game where violence is not a necessity, and that players can absolutely run from start to finish and run a full game without ever actually hitting anyone or shooting anyone. Because you can work your job, you can pay your taxes, you can go and play your games in your house, go have a drink, read some comic books, run around, do weird stuff, go for some races. But I think at the same time, we're trying to do a sort of crusty capitalist dystopia. Like, there will be violence. And so it sort of depends on area. So in the central districts where it's upper class, everything is really wealthy, you'll see only a few people walking around, and there'll be a lot of like defense robots, and there won't be anything going on there that won't be shut down immediately. And then obviously the outside of the city, you'll have psychos and crazy NPCs that will be fighting all the time, and psycho NPCs will be coded to attack on sight anything except for each other, unless it's just themselves. So they'll kill everyone until it's just them left, and then they'll kill each other, right? And they'll sometimes bleed into the city, and groups of them will end up walking into these abandoned districts on the outskirts, and maybe they'll come into the low class, and there'll be some scraps happening between the characters. There will be gangs, and I do hope that we can eventually develop. We're sort of still early days in that now, but a gang warfare system where they'll take districts from each other, and there'll be a layer of that happening above you, where you could choose to join it, you could choose not to, but maybe one day you're living in a district where you're paying your bills and you're going home, and it's the same every day, and then one day you're like, oh, what's going on? There's a bunch of dudes wearing green here, and then you realize there's a gang called the Blue Dogs or something that have just come in, and now there's random events that are going to happen where they're going to mug you, or they're going to ask you for a tax, or they're going to say, no, I see you live here, you're cool, you're safe, and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. And then 6 days later, they're all dead on the floor, and there's a different gang that's moved in, and you're like, okay. And you look at the map and you'll see like there's actually a grand structure to it. Maybe you join them and you work your way up their ranks and end up, getting a few followers and a decent bit of pay packet, but you've got to go and assassinate someone in a middle class district or something, or maybe you don't pay attention to it. But I do want to lean into the sort of finite nature of factions and groups and things like that, which is something I did with Warsim in a lot of different ways. I think the bandit system was probably the strongest example of that. But it's where there's not an infinite number that just come out of the woodwork. And actually, like, if this blue gang or whatever occupies a district and maybe several more, you could kill them all. And then what happens? Well, there's no gang anymore, right? And maybe you could be this crazy vendetta person that just goes around wiping all the gangs off the city map, or only leaving a few, and there's a few left that, you're like, oh, they're fine. And then a couple of years later, they've taken over a huge portion of the city because you've wiped out the competition, And I want that kind of simulation to be as deep as we can make it. And I'm aware that those things do necessitate the creation of bugs, because the more that interacts with itself, the more things that you cannot expect can touch each other. But this is why I want to spend as long as I can being able to craft something that's actually of quality and contains within it systems that really don't get the chance to shine as much like this, or they're the whole game usually, rather than being, an element of this deep thing. And I guess that's the hope of it being a sort of 2D, more Stardew Valley looking project. We can do what Eric Baroni did and build something that like is greater than the sum of its parts, and we can punch above our weight because it's 2D and we're not having to build the 3D craziness. So we can spend a lot more time on gameplay, which is what it's all about, really, isn't it? When we're making video games.
It's good that you've got the luxury as well to go all in and take your time with this as well, because it doesn't even sound like it's something that's going to come out next year. I imagine this is still going to be a few years away.
Yeah. So I've been saying to myself for about a year and a half now, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to feel like that, it's at this point, it could be a case that maybe say in 3 years time of much more intense development, we could look at like an early access, potentially. Yeah. And I think my only rule would be I don't want to put it out there if I don't think the gameplay loop is closed, which it isn't yet, and it's not like a fully playable build that I think is showing it as it should be. So it could be that we have an early access. It could be that we find another way around it. And I'm still mulling a few ideas, but yeah, I can see even with a full development team, like right now we just got part-timers because we're still sort of fully sourcing the remainder of the funds to like actually go all in on this. Yeah. But when we're full throttle, I think, it's still going to be quite a few years. And then the intention is that once we get to that point, whether it's early access or a Kickstarter or something like that, we build ourselves to a point where it can release, and then it's going to still work afterwards, And I think like whether I split the team and we end up working on other sort of games using the same engine, but still keep like at least 2 people on Slumbox post-release, I think that works, because I don't want to stop developing this, and I want to keep building it into something just uncompetable. And obviously, refining any elements that aren't refined yet, you know what I mean? Because, what's the point otherwise? And I want to leave some half-made stuff in my history. Like I want to make some magnum opuses. Like, I want to make something really strong. And I guess like Warsim's taught me that this is a possible way to do things. But now it's learning how to sort of do that same style of development, but with a crew, and obviously making sure that they're respected and making sure that they're not just gonna, sorry mate, I actually can't pay you anymore. Bye-bye. I want to make sure that we're in a secure place where everyone can actually be supported by it, and we can build something that hopefully changes the world, to be honest. But we'll see. So it goes.
Yeah, admirable goals. Is there any sort of, because the Welsh government can give grants to developers. Have you considered that? Is that a possible option for you if you needed it, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one that I'm hot on now, actually, and I'm hoping the very next grant round, if any of the Welsh government people are watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like absolutely, you're right. It's probably the best single source of money. I think the only thing that they push out there is that they will absolutely not be your only source of funding. So what they want to see is that you're getting it from other places as well. And I think previously maybe I didn't have such a strong example of that because I just had a bit of Warsim residual coming through really. But we are looking at other sources at the moment and ways to sort of guarantee that it won't just be the Welsh government funding it. But yeah, absolutely, I think it's a great source and would help massively. So yeah, definitely something I'm going to be looking into.
Is there specific criteria there for people that are able to get those grants? I don't know if you're familiar with a game called Toward Dawn. It's by an indie developer called Debbie Serene, and she put out a Welsh mythology-based game. But she's from England, and she tried to get a grant but was denied. And I just felt like it was a little bit. To me, it felt a little harsh because there really aren't any kind of Welsh based games, if you like. This was completely, it's like a 2D RPG, but it was all in on the kind of Welsh mythology aspects. And it felt a shame really, because I think if a game like that can't get any kind of funding, do you think it's because she was outside of Wales? So do you think, is that a requirement,
I think sometimes it is. It depends on the fund because I think sometimes they do the fund directly and sometimes they facilitate them through things like I don't know if it's Yuki or if it's what is it? There's another one. It's like a UK games. Oh, that's it. Sorry, the UK Games Fund, UKGF.
Yeah.
And I think depending on who it is, they sort of set the criteria. So previously, one of the issues I had was I didn't have any PAYE staff. So their main metric is job creation, and they're like, well, when we provide this money, we want to see more jobs, right? And if you already don't have anyone who is PAYE in your company, then it sort of doesn't look good that there's going to be more of that created. And so for me, I was like, damn, my two contractors are in America because I couldn't find anyone who worked in the language I used, which is Game Maker, GML. I tried to find some in Cardiff and I couldn't. So I was like, damn, okay, that's fine. And then the other one is it could be where you're based, locationally. I think like obviously they have to prove that money's, if it's coming from the budget for Wales, that it's helping the people within Wales, right? And whereas like there are budgets in England for people within England, I think they might argue that that's taking money from one locality and providing it to another one. But I definitely see your point.
Yeah.
And then I think the only other thing that was a little bit of a problem for me was the age of my company. So obviously I've been doing Warsim for over a decade, but Worldviper, at the time I applied for my very first ever grant with the Welsh government, was under a year old. And I think they were like, you can just make a company in minutes, can't you? Do you know what I mean? So I guess it has to have that sort of proof in the pudding that it's been cooking and it's building. And so I think we'll get there. We'll get there, definitely. And I'm friends with everyone who's ever received the Welsh Government grant for gaming at this point now, by the looks of it. So
yeah,
a lot
you've
of
got to
people
be next in line.
go, hey, mate, how did you do that?
Yeah, you'll be next in line, I'm sure.
Fingers crossed, mate.
Just you mentioned the 2 world records that you've already achieved. Just talk to me about those.
Yeah, I'm very proud of them actually. So they're pretty like it's content based things that have sort of triggered these ones, and I'm not sure if we'll get any more in the future. I'd love to like lock in and try and find other ways, but I think these things do benefit the game. It's not just some flashy like, oh, we got a world record. Although that will help, I reckon, in the future, obviously, to pull people in. But the first one is the most comic books in a video game. So it's kind of a weird one. But I couldn't find any other games originally that have ever done them. And then someone showed me there's one game that has 5 comic strips. And there's one for each boss battle or something like that. It was pretty cool, to be honest. And other than that, there are games like Fallout, which I think has comic books, but they're an item that you just see the cover, right? It's not an actual readable comic book. So there's only one game that, or a few games really, that have had like readable comic books in there. But even so, it's been one or it's been like a few. And we've got 100. And these are, you can find them in the world. You can find them in a shop. You can find them in your inventory, whatever. And they're sealed. You have to rip the packaging off. Once they're open, you can flip through. You have a front cover, an advertisement, an inner page, and then a back cover. And we have 100 of those, 4 pages for each, fully mapped out. And I see it as the sort of like Fallout Skyrimization, the way Skyrim, Elder Scrolls in general series sort of treats books. They've got hundreds of books, but really like it's not a 50-page novel. It's like 3 pages, right? But it still gets the point across. Yeah. And I see that as the same for the comics. So that's a lot of these have been like, I wrote them all, and a lot of them have been designed like to show off things that are sort of gameplay related, and others are sort of to fill, characters in the world, and create like franchises. So we've got one called Kickfighter, which is like it's like Mortal Kombat but with feet. And each comic book is a different enemy, and there's some really weird editions of that comic. And the artist is amazing; he did such a good job. And then we've got others that are for Jeremy Sirius, which is a character based on me, who's a punk frontman of a clone punk band, right? And they're rebelling against the world or whatever. And then we've got one called Lemon, who's a guy who got a free lemon sample and then went to the bank, and someone was like, "Give me all your money," and he was like, "Ah!" and he squeezed the lemon juice and it went in the guy's eye. And then they were like, "You're a hero." And so he ends up dressing as a lemon and fighting crime, and then he gets shot. And it's a whole crazy like 3 or 4 part saga.
I love it.
And I want these to be collectible, but then we've put PorkChop on it as well. So although there's 100 comic books, there is millions of possible variants. So you can find one with blood on it. You know, if it's not sealed, you know, maybe it's ripped apart. You can't read the full page because it's ripped and it's missing a bit. And a sealed one, obviously, it's worth more money, but you can't read it until you rip the seal off, and now the money's gone down. So like, there's a lot of interesting elements to these. Brittle comic books, they'll look a bit weird, and once you read them, they'll crumble. So you can only read it once. And there's like a lot of weird stuff like that. And I'm even thinking about adding ad-free comics where you don't get that ad page, but instead some sort of cool additional content, and it's going to cost more than it'll be a higher value one. And you can get them signed, and I've got the signatures of both myself and the artist. And then a little while ago, so not all of the 100 comics were made by the same guy, but all of the ones that I think maybe 60 or 70 of the ones that are in there we wrote between each other. And then we had a comic artist on Instagram called Beetle Moses, who makes some absolutely amazing comics. And I think like a lot of people actually know him. So I got sent a bunch of his comic books to me by friends, and I was like, these are amazing. It was just like reels. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have a conversation with this guy. So we had a chat, and I licensed the use of 27 of his best comic books. He gave me a fake front cover to use. And so now we've also got his comics in the game as something you can find as well. It's just more content, isn't it? More fatness. And the only thing he wanted to say, which I respect him for, he was like, I don't want to give it to you if you're selling them for like real money in game. And I was like, oh, don't worry, mate. It's not one of those bullshit microtransaction games. It's just fleshing the content out for actual players to have in this RPG. So respect to him. He didn't want his artwork to be used in a shit way. But now we've got guaranteed the world record for the most comic books in a video game. And that's number one. So number two is so at the moment, I'm confident we have the biggest soundtrack of any indie game in history, with 251 songs. The world record for the biggest soundtrack in any game ever, allegedly, is GTA 4 with DLC, which has 345 songs. And I don't know how correct that is personally, because I think that world record entry hasn't been updated for a while. And I don't know if you update it by having to request it or not. But I've done a bit of research, and so we're still sort of jury's out on that. But I'm confident there's no indie game that has gone even close to that. So on the indie game metric alone, I think we have that record. What I'm actively doing now is, especially once we get more budget, we've got 251 songs at the moment from 50 bands. Almost all of them are Welsh. And the plan is to try and achieve a fucking world record soundtrack in every sense, you know, and be not just indie, but in gaming, period, to be the biggest soundtrack. And I've had to listen to over 500 Welsh bands to find the good ones. And like, no offense, I'm in a Welsh band, you know, a lot of my stuff's shit, but there's some really bad stuff out there where people don't know how to mix and master their music, and it gave me a massive headache. But I found some real gems, some real fucking gems. And I'm really proud of the fact that actually, like, some of the ones that I've got the rights to now are, like, legitimately, in my opinion, some of the best songs that have come out of Wales, like, maybe ever. Wow. And, like, some of these I've seen live, and I mean, maybe I indulged a bit too much in it, but I'd go to shows for bands I liked who are Welsh. And I'd walk up on stage afterwards and be like, right, which of you deals with your emails? Because you haven't been replying to me at all. And they're like, oh, we thought it was a scam. Sorry. Like, and it's happened so many times. I'm just like, do you know what? I don't care. Like, I'm gonna enter their worlds in person because I really want to get these songs. And I've managed to get so many of them that way, you know, and we're all on the same soundtrack now, and it's looking really, really fat. And the goal with that is, you know, if Slumbox pops off and it does do what I'm intending it to do, which is shake the games industry up a little bit and deliver something interesting, suddenly millions of players around the world are going to hear this music and go, who the hell are these guys? And Google them, right? And now suddenly overnight, the Welsh music scene gets lifted. And I see it all the time. You know, I'm playing in gigs and in venues in Cardiff, in Newport, in all sorts of places in South Wales. And there's a lot of bands that if they were in London or LA would be the biggest bands in the world. And instead, what will realistically happen is they play for a couple of years and have like a mild bit of fun to play into rooms full of a few hundred people, never really blow up. And then they just quit and go and grow up and have kids and do their day job. And it happens all the time. And it's like they were actually good enough. They could have gone the whole way, but there's no feedback. You know, they're playing some reasonably sized rooms, but they're never playing anywhere bigger than that. And you see a few that break through. You know, you get a few Bullet for My Valentine's, right, coming from the valleys. You get a few Bonnie Tylers, you know, a few massive ones. But really, like, you know, we're a bit like held down here, I guess, by the necessity of the fact that we're a small country. You know, there's not a lot going on. And so I see this as a way to also, like, at the same time lift and hopefully bring way more attention on the Welsh music scene. So it's kind of like a bit of a dichotomy in the project where it's happened at the same time as I've really like thrown myself into music, and I'm seeing the music scene from the other side and being inside it going, okay, I get it now. You know, I see exactly how this works. So Slumbox is also like an attempt to deliver like a really punk soundtrack. I mean, it's not just punk. We've got, I think, 10 radio stations minimum now that are full to the brim of music that is very different, from hyperpop, death metal, hardcore punk. We've got rap. You know what I mean? We've got all sorts of weird stuff, but some really, really good stuff I'm like really proud to have in. So I haven't just been filling it with whatever music I can get my hands on, because it's going to be shit to listen to. Do you know what I mean? Like, it has to be something that's going to sound good. And I think like on that front, it's going to be something a lot of people aren't going to be expecting, and hopefully make a lot of these bands famous. You know, that'd be a dream come true, to be honest.
I love that, because it's obviously, again, you know, like you mentioned, you're in a band yourself, Dim Parcio, no parking for the non-Welsh speakers out there, but clearly that being another passion for you means you want to put that into something that you're working on, and then elevate, you know, all these artists, these Welsh musicians that you know deserve better. I think it's just such an admirable goal to try and hopefully, like you say, Slumbox will take off. Then all these other Welsh musicians will feel the effects of that as well. Fingers crossed. Are you putting any of your own music in there?
Oh yeah, no, we've already had a conversation the band, and to be fair, actually, a lot of my band members' other projects have been popped in there as well. But I think I've been given permission for basically every song we make to be in there. So all the quality, all the top quality anthems will be on Viper Radio in the game.
Are you going to put like any live concert or live gig versions in there? That would be cool as well.
So it's funny you say that, right? So actually, I've been having a few conversations, and I think the thing is, I don't want to make my programmers shit themselves by saying, "Oh, also we're going to do this," like, because I really want to make sure we're getting the core done. But I'm really keen on the idea of these spontaneous random events that happen in the city, where maybe there's an arena that's always spawned in a certain place, and maybe you can buy tickets, and it's like, okay, but you have to go to this place for this specific. It's not like a normal video game where it's like the world doesn't move forward, so like this will always be waiting for you to walk up to it. Like tonight at 7:00 in Central District, whatever, there is a gig happening. You have a ticket, but if you don't show up, you've just got a piece of paper. Congratulations, right?
Yeah.
And I really, really, really want to try and code some kind of physics-based mosh pit system where you can also like press a button and it could just be like low-level PvP, right? Like we could just keep the same combat system even, but just have like different moves, but have it not cause as much damage and be sort of acceptable and not result in immediately the police coming to you. And have this like weird low-level PvP, press spacebar to crowd surf, you know, and now you're moving left and right, trying to, you know, whatever. Like, and I've got a lot of bands that would absolutely give me their live recordings or do fresh live recordings to be the bands that would do that. So I think this is definitely something, if not post-release content, is, you know, something I'm going to look at putting in the game. But I think we do have potentially some live versions of music on the soundtrack already. And there's some really good bands that I'm in talks with at the moment that have some ridiculously good live takes. And I'm like, please let me have it. I'll pay you. Do you know what I mean? Like, so we're working through it.
That idea is just, I love that so much. Like, you could wake up with some injuries or something after feeling the effects of the mosh pit or something, battered and bruised.
Oh man, yeah.
How's it work then with the licensing of these Welsh bands? You can sort of maybe understand if some of them are going to be like, well, are you paying me for this, or how, you know, how is it working on that front? That must be a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, I find it quite stressful, to be honest, because I don't like I'm on stage in a punk band, right, talking about like, you know, fucking anti-capitalist shit, and I'm saying, right, okay, we need to have a contract now. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, it feels a bit dirty, but it's just the way the world is, isn't it? Sadly, but yeah. So my stance has been, I'm not giving anyone different treatment. So I've had people who've tried to negotiate like a different thing that's higher than what other people are getting, and I said the same to my band. Like we receive the exact same amount of money as every other artist, because my hope is that in the future we'll all be fucking eating. Do you know what I mean? But I'm like, I'm not going to desperately like, oh, chuck you thousands and then chuck you. Do you know what I mean? Like, no. So everyone gets the same sort of blanket payment. And if someone's not up for it, that's fine. You know, I'm not trying to pressure or stress anyone, but I open negotiations essentially. This payment,
yeah,
it's going to be in a game. It can't be used for anything but a video game. And it's as simple as that, really. Yeah. And luckily, I think I've been open enough about it with everybody and shown everyone exactly where I'm about and whatever, that everyone has agreed. So everyone that's on the soundtrack has been paid equally. And yeah, it's been a long journey. I think I've sort of paused my music licensing thing at the moment because I was pretty constantly on it for about a year. Yeah. And we hit like 250 songs, and then we actually broke the game engine. Because it was like, okay, all the music started playing weirdly, and I was like, oh god, what the fuck is this? And then we learned that actually we've reached the like maximum cap it could buffer or something. And I was like, okay, so we had to find some like creative workarounds, and that's when I was like, right, the game is still in its infancy. We don't even have like a solid demo yet. I could probably relax on the soundtrack. Yeah, but we've now got a world record for an indie soundtrack at least. So yeah, but I'm confident I'll come back to it swinging, and I've already got a lot of people that have actually offered me their music from their band. So I'm sort of reviewing new stuff still and sort of weighing it up.
That's great.
But yeah, no, it's been a wild one. The sort of music side of the project, very educational experience.
Yeah, I imagine. I love the idea of gigs as well. Just sort of hoping that like one-time events that you can sort of turn up for. You'll have to make like in-game version of Dim PorkChop. Just your band members or something. That'd be amazing. I love the comics as well. What you mentioned, those little stories, it kind of enhances lore within the universe of the game. And I saw on your website that you've got like ideas for sketches and draft versions of the comics, which are higher in value. I just thought that is such a unique, cool idea as well. So all the ideas are just crazy. I just love it. I really do love the sound of it. I know you mentioned translations earlier on. Any ideas for a Welsh translation? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I think if I'm doing it in different languages, it's an inevitability that it's going to be in Welsh. Obviously, I've got some people that'll be jumping at helping me with that. But yeah, no, it's got to be done really. Especially again, we're talking about Welsh government grants, right? But we're not going to do it in Welsh. Like, no, it's got to be done.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm really keen, to be honest. Like I've heard good things and doomy things about translation, but I think it's so worth doing. And so my goal is going to be to do it in every language. And I've got some unique ideas also about how I'm planning to integrate language into the game in general, not just in sort of different language packs, but in content. So I'm going to see what I can do on that front. But yeah, no, definitely, mate, definitely.
Good. Yeah. You'll have to have like some of these gangs and factions. You'll have to have some sort of like Welsh faction going on. That
you're going back.
Yeah.
Give me your fucking credits, mate.
Screaming in Welsh and stuff, and Welsh graffiti all over the walls. I don't know. It would be cool.
Yeah, man. I can see it.
All right. Well, I won't try and keep you too much longer, but are any other sort of maybe little Welsh isms, Welsh things, Welsh references you'd love to sneak into the game at some point?
Into Slumbox?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think the thing is, it just comes out when you're doing it. So like, I think I'll be creating stuff and I'll just randomly that day something will happen and I'll stick that in. It's so spontaneous. Yeah. But I'm confident there'll be plenty of Welshisms. I'll have to think on it. Maybe get a couple of Welsh cakes in there, like. Yeah. But I got to think of like futuristic spins on it, right? I guess that's the thing. So like, what would the slang be like in 100 years or 200 years, right? What would the remnant Welsh cultural elements be in a sort of weirdly post-apocalyptic future world? But yeah, I think I'll come up with loads, and then I'll let you know, and you can put them on your massive list. You're probably going to be growing even more by then. I had to flip through it. It astounds me how rigorous your list is actually of games that I wouldn't even thought would have Welsh references in it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? Yeah,
it really is.
No, I need to add Slumbox specifically to it. So if there's if there's any little things already implemented, just let me know. I'll whack them on. But obviously, if there's anything you want to keep quiet, we'll leave it off for now. But yeah, definitely, I want to anything I can do to sort of help out. As small as my little website might be, I do get eyes on it. There's a little bit of traction. So anything I can do to bring a little bit of attention to your games.
I appreciate it, mate. I appreciate it. And still, like, it doesn't matter what your website's saying. Like, it's a good website. It does its job really fucking well. And I mean, the longer it stays there, mate, the longer it does its thing, the more of an authority it's going to be on its this area, right? So, big respect, man.
Yeah, thank you. All right, a couple more little things then. Is there any personal favorite Welsh things, references in games that you personally enjoy, Welsh characters or anything like that you can think of?
Yeah, I think probably my single favorite was playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag and being like, oh, this is like maybe the best Assassin's Creed game there ever was. And the guy is just some fucking guy from Swansea. Like, get out of here. Like, that was incredible. So I kind of love that. I'm like, we are like a bit of a pirate nation, and there's been a lot of pirates like Captain Morgan and loads of fucking Welsh pirates that, and probably many more we didn't know about. Like, so I always thought that was sick. That's probably my single favorite like direct reference.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you.
Man as well, and he like.
Yeah. It's supposed to be remaking it, you know. It's rumored to come out next year, but it's no official. But it's been rumored so much, and there's been little leaks and things. So it really does sound like it's being remade for next year, or at the very least remastered. So
I'm sure it'd be fucking wicked, to be fair.
Yeah, looking forward to it. All right, I think that's just about everything. Huw, let me know your social media stuff, and I'll pop the links on the screen and everything.
Yeah, man. I don't even know what my new social medias are for those things, but you can plug whatever you got, I guess.
No, I'll pop them up. I know, you got your Instagram and your website. I'll link to Slumbox, the website and everything like that. Link to Warsim. So it's been an insightful little chat, and good luck with the band as well.
Thanks, man.
It's I'm looking forward to hearing all that music in there, and I hope one day I can come to one of your gigs or something in Wales. Or if you come over here, that would be amazing as well.
Yeah, might get a little Texan gig on the go.
Yeah. All right, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. Take care of yourself. Good luck with the game. Diolch yn fawr.
You too, man. Ta-ra, mate.
Ta-ra.